You are a loyal American. You will believe us. And we know that there were a whole bunch of these very badly amateurish Photoshop photos leaked onto the internet. And we collected them together, and we not only pointed out the obvious signs of fraud, we found the original source images, one of them from a movie. They took a scene from a movie and tried to slug something that looked like bin Laden in there and pass it off as a real photo from the raid. I mean, it was amateur night out here. And it was all hastily done. And I think the reason it was hastily done is explained by the fact that the original report said it was the Pakistani military that attacked that house and killed that old man. And then after it was all over and they had a dead body, it was the neighbors saying, we think it might have been bin Laden. So the Pakistani forces inform their chain of command. It goes from there to the U.S. chain of command, and Obama says, grab the body. We're going to stuff it. Put it on display in the rotunda in a nice little pose for everybody to admire. And I guess they got the body into the air in the helicopter, and people are looking at it and saying, no way is this bin Laden. But it's already gone out in the media, and it's going to be a huge embarrassment. So they dump the body at sea. They start leaking these very hastily concocted, photoshopped pictures. And then when those crater, they say, we will not release any more pictures out of respect for the dead. We're just going to throw them into the ocean. And then they staged that photo of Obama and the other people in the White House Situation Room. I think it was basically they emptied a closet and put him in there. And it's so laughable because everybody's like working on their laptops and stuff. But if you look at the laptop screens, they're all black. They're not turned on. It was a staged shot, and it was just being done in a rush, and nobody was really thinking. So the actual story is Pakistan got this guy, whoever it was. There's no evidence it was bin Laden. There is considerable evidence the real Osama bin Laden died of natural causes all the way back in December of 2001. And we know that all the bin Laden tapes that surfaced ever since then have been exposed as fakes and frauds. It's a gigantic lie. And President Obama is attempting to raise on a busted flush, trying to use this for his campaign going into November. So they're out there pushing this book, and basically the attitude of the government right now is, you know, if you're a loyal American, you will believe everything that we say, and if you don't believe us, then you're only helping the terrorists. I have a different philosophy. Truth above all. Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall. I would I will have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all. I will not live under a government that lies to us on such a constant basis, because when you live under a government that lies to you, you can't know what's really going on in the world. You can't know whether these wars are right or wrong. You can't know anything if you are fed a steady diet of lies and propaganda by the government and the corporate media. And right now, looking back over the last 20 years that I have been doing my website and my radio shows, Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. I remember many, many, many years ago, I got to go down to Australia and hang out with some people there. They got a huge computer graphics, visual effects industry down there. And I almost went to work for them, but at the last second, I don't want to give up my American citizenship. And but while I was down there, the comment I kept hearing as I was talking about all this stuff, because I had my website even then, and the comment I get back from the Australian is, you know, for an American, you're actually pretty well clued in on what's going on. Well, thank you, I think. So we're going to be talking about 9/11 a lot more tomorrow, but at this particular point, I think there's hardly anybody not on a government paycheck that is willing to support this official pile of bovine excrement. And I guess probably having established the Golden Poo Award, I ought to retroactively give one to the Bush administration, because that 9/11 story is the biggest steamer in history. Biggest lie. And it is time that we acknowledge it as such. And, of course, the U.S. government will never admit that they lied, never admit that they were wrong. And the longer they continue to support that official story, the more they delegitimize themselves. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Scott, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? How you doing, Brother Mike?
I'm doing good.
I love you, brother. We're sitting at about 72 degrees today with a beautiful sunny outside, so I thought I'd share that with you. You know, Mike, it's amazing, like you said, how much bogus and deceiving they try to shove down America and the world. I remember you a couple years talking back about this was brought up. He died back in 1992 of kidney failure. They were, you were saying this guy has had like 13 lives more than a cat, and yet with the election coming up, they're going to bring this out to saturate it to people, to prop up our fearless leader that he's a hero. And it's amazing how they, over and over again, they come up with, oh yeah, they dumped them out in the sea, and they bring a book out about it. It's amazing how, like you were saying, they're trying to deceive the people and fool them. And I just wanted to make a comment on that. And I'll leave you here, and you keep it up, big brother.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And yeah, at the end of 2001, it was kind of openly reported. Certainly in the foreign press, it was openly reported Bin Laden had died. He'd had a funeral, buried in an undisclosed location. And even Fox News at one point said, yes, we have reports that Bin Laden has died. And that somebody in the government said, we can't have Bin Laden die. We need a supervillain, somebody we can wave at the people to push them forward toward war. And if you go back to George Orwell's 1984, remember the fictional, even within the fictional character of Emmanuel Goldstein, the supervillain on whom the government blamed everything that was going wrong. And there was the 2-minute hate. Every day they would put Emmanuel Goldstein's face up on the view screens, and people would scream their hate and their anger and their rage that they would do anything to get Emmanuel Goldstein. Well, that's exactly what they were doing with Osama bin Laden. He was put up there for us to vent our hatred on and to blame all the hardship on, saying, yes, we know you're without food and you're without jobs and everything, but we've got to fight a war against Osama bin Laden. And I think one of the reasons why Washington, D.C. decided that they were going to go with this dead bin Laden guy is they figured maybe it's time to wrap it up because too many people know that he was already dead all along. And they'd, achieve closure and they'd declare victory and that would be the end of it. But it was a complete hoax. And I don't know, maybe Washington, D.C. believes its own propaganda. And somebody actually thought they'd gotten the real bin Laden. And that led to that huge embarrassment of announcing it to the press, and then all of a sudden they've got a body that nobody's going to believe is Osama bin Laden. And then they had to start with the Photoshop fakery and all this other stuff, and now this book, they're raising on a busted flush. We all know the real bin Laden died in 2001. We all know that every single audio and videotape claiming to be bin Laden since then was a hoax and a fraud. Some of them pretty badly done. And they tried to keep his image alive to use it to scare us all into throwing our children onto the bayonets of Israel's enemies. Sadly, it worked for a certain amount of time. But I think it's time for this hoax to come to an end here. Another caller on the line, Christine in Connecticut. Aloha, Christine. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to bring up a point that I know that in other countries, they, as far as Building 7 goes, that in other countries, when they build embassies, they take charges, they put charges in them, so if they have to take the building down in an emergency, they do. And it's seen as how that Building 7 was CIA, FBI, FEMA, all that. I would think that building also would have been charged. So
well, I don't know what they do in other countries. The problem with putting in some kind of a pre-cutter charge into a building is what happens if it goes off by accident. I mean, the liability issues and the insurance coverage issues would definitely, I think, restrict people from doing that. But as far as the World Trade Center is concerned, it was known that in the months before 9/11, there was a huge vacancy problem. There were a lot of entire floors were empty. And we do know that there was some kind of a strange construction project going on at the World Trade Center weeks ahead of 9/11. And the people doing this work had their own private elevator. They had their own entrance. Nobody saw them coming and going. They just heard all the jackhammers and all the stuff going on. And we had reports from people in the still occupied floors that, dust was settling down from the ceiling above them. That it was really heavy work going on there. So the reality is, I think the World Trade Center security was being run by Marvin Bush, the president's brother. And so the opportunity of going in there, and wiring some cutter charges in all of those buildings, very much the opportunity was there. We know that some kind of strange work was going on there. And apparently the Port Authority has lost all the paperwork regarded to that maintenance. All they're saying is, they were renovating the elevators, which doesn't explain jackhammers and dust and so forth coming on there. But we understand that if you're having a controlled demolition, if you don't want it to look like a controlled demolition, you don't have to put as much explosives in there. You just need to cut, those key core columns, those load-bearing columns, and it will come right down. In terms of, Building 7, we know the World Trade Center 7 had far worse fires in its history than on 9/11. And what seems to have emerged from the aftermath of 9/11 is that Flight 93 was supposed to crash into Building 7 to justify its coming down. And apparently the crew of Flight 93 regained control of their airplane, either from the supposed terrorists or possibly from a remote control system that was being used to hijack the plane remotely. Because remember, Dov Zakheim, who was comptroller at the Pentagon when all those trillions of dollars went missing, his job before he got that job, before he was appointed by President Bush, he ran a company that manufactured remote control systems for commercial airliners so they could be grabbed out of the air to thwart a hijacking. And obviously the same system could be used to simulate a hijacking. And it appears that Flight 93 was intended for Building 7. We know on the Naudet Brothers documentary about 9/11, the firefighters are saying there's a third plane heading into the World Trade Towers. Somebody was saying there's another plane coming in, aiming at the World Trade Center. So the theory is Flight 93's crew regained control of their aircraft, but they could not be allowed to land because the facts on the airplane didn't match the cover story. If the plane had landed successfully, they would have seen there were no terrorists. They would have examined the plane. They would have found the remote control system operational. So they had to be shot down, which is why the wreckage of Flight 93 was spread over 8 miles of countryside, which is not consistent with a genuine crash of the airplane. Then they crank out a movie, Flight 93 and the heroic passengers and everything, to sort of glue that official story in the minds of America. And it's another winner of the Golden Poo Award over there. So the reality is we don't have to worry about pre-positioning of explosives any more than a couple of weeks ahead of time. And we have documented there was some kind of construction going on in the two towers in Building 7 weeks before 9/11. And together with that, of course, a lot of people, on the inside were getting out of the building. Zim Shipping, Israel's state shipping line, which is connected with the Israeli government, broke their lease, cost them $500,000 to break their lease and move over to New Jersey just a couple of weeks before 9/11. Rudy Giuliani had his offices in the World Trade Towers. He got them out weeks before 9/11. And so, if you're not really being too careful about it, I know we all know that controlled demolitions can take, months of preparation, but that's if you're trying to do it really, really carefully. And if the goal is just to bring the buildings down and make it look like they're collapsing, then you don't have to use as many cutters. You don't have to be as careful about it. We've documented that cutters were on those central beams. We've seen the slant cuts on the load-bearing members. We've seen the iron slag, which is the classic signature of the use of thermite. And, we don't need to have any, wild speculation that the buildings were pre-wired to be destroyed. And again, I don't think it's a valid line of inquiry. I think it's a false trail because, again, what happens if something sets this thing off accidentally? What if there's a lightning strike that detonates these pre-planned cutter charges inside the building? It doesn't make any sense. No insurance company would insure such a building. No owner of a building would want that in his building because if it does blow up by accident, the liability would just immediately drive them out of business. So I don't think this is a valid line of inquiry. All righty, thank you for the phone call. We're going to be moving along here right now. Let's see, a member of What Really Happened just posted yet another story about the acoustic evidence regarding explosions for World Trade Center 7. And there was a little bit of a clever dodge there because if you go back and you look at the corporate media's footage of the collapse of World Trade Center 7, look up at the very top at that penthouse because it simply pops off, and that tells you they edited something out, and what they edited out was the tape where you hear that explosion that initiates that entire collapse. And you can see the windows popping out down these